Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Brian Willett, coming to you live from the deep woods of Western Georgia on this November 21st, 2023. Tonight we try to do what we attempted last week and failed at because of internet problems. I think we've got them resolved. I'll explain what happened in a moment here, but tonight we are going to continue with the same subject. So it's going to be Japanese spirituality with our guest J.J. Johnson, who is a returning guest. Last time he talked about Second Temple Judaism. Tonight it's all about Japanese spirituality. It should be very interesting, but in the first hour I'm going to clarify some crazy myths that are out there about ghost adventures. In the last episode I did, you don't want to miss it. Don't go away. Everybody, I am so happy that you were able to join us tonight for the final episode of Vestiges of the Season 8, episode 7 rather, sorry. This has been a pretty good season except for the end here where we had some issues, and it turns out that I discovered that all of the internet issues that we've been having on this show since the very beginning, since we've been broadcasting from this new location, which was about a year and a half now, was all the result of a network adapter setting, a very simple one, LSO. It basically what it does is it transfers large packets of data from the network card to the from the processor, the CPU to the network card to save processor power, which in today's day and age is really actually not terribly necessary anymore because most people's computers today, modern computers, all have more than adequate CPUs. The fact that we were having this issue because of a setting that was added to this network card to help people save on, I think it was 0.2% CPU power. I mean, who cares about that? Right now, my CPU is running at 0.7%. I don't think it's going to matter if it saves a 0.2% when it's only running at 0.7 at the present time. I've got a very good processor, of course, but most people have good processors. Maybe not as powerful as this computer, but even lower end computers have good processors today. So it's really kind of a feature that is not necessary, and it doesn't play well with my ISP. And so what it would do is when you were wired in, and you think that an Ethernet connection is the way to go, right? Because it's a more stable connection, and it is. But for whatever reason, that was the network card setting. It was for the Ethernet, the physical Ethernet connection. What it was doing was the ISP was cutting it off when the load was too much, or was too much on the actual processor itself, the communication between the ISP and the computer. And so when that would happen, what it would do is it would create congestion within that connection, and we would start losing frames and packets of information. And that's when you would start seeing the buffering, the lower quality feed, and sometimes even cutting us off altogether. When everything upgraded last week, unexpectedly, and upgrades, this is one of the things it does, is that it resets a lot of your previous settings. So this is something we're going to have to check every single time we go live, right before we go live. And I'm going to have to do a speed test to see if it's happening. But we were getting only 0.04 megabytes per second upload speed last week. And that's why it couldn't even make the connection. Once I turned that setting off, we were back up to 1415, which is not great, but for this location in the middle of nowhere, when I say I'm in the deep woods of Western Georgia, I mean it. That's actually quite fascinating that we can get that much speed out here. So it's enough. That's enough speed. 1415 upload is more than enough to do a good, healthy stream. And it's also enough to actually upgrade the quality. So we should be able to stream in high definition. I didn't want to chance it tonight because I didn't need another event where we have to tell JJ Johnson, our guest, that it's not happening. You know, this has happened every time he's come on the show. So we wanted this one to be one that works. To add even more interest and intrigue to this whole thing, my son and I were transferring data from his PlayStation 4 to his PlayStation 5. He upgraded, and it initially said, you know, more than an hour ago, it initially said it would only take 4 minutes to do it. Well, it lied. And so it needs to also, in order to do that transfer, it needs to be on the internet connection using both upload and download bandwidth. And if you turn either system off, you run the risk of damaging the system and permanently corrupting the data or even the operating system on the console. We certainly didn't want to do that. But we were needed to go live here, and this took a whole lot longer than anticipated. So right now, I'm looking at the bandwidth, and we have been solid, the most solid we've ever been since this setting's been off. So it's even allowing us to stream not only to all of you, not only simulcasting the audio to Spreaker, not only being able to broadcast and stream to Zoom for our guests, but it's also allowing him to be able to download data from the old console and upload it to the new console. I think we're good. I think the internet is fixed, and no thanks to IT. I had to do this all on my own, not to pat myself on the back, but you know, the old saying, if you want something done right, do it yourself. I've never known any other axiom to be more true than that one. I'd love to have a whole team of people that could help me do things, but I think I'd be pulling my hair out more than doing it myself, to be honest with you. You know, and we're going to kind of talk about some of the craziness of the people out there today, because before we get to our subject tonight on Japanese spirituality, I want to go over some of the how do I even say this politely? I guess there is no way to say it politely. The bullshit on the internet about the last episode of Ghost Adventures that I did, Nightmare in Northridge. And, you know, of course, Reddit was the worst one. Twitter, probably second worst. Facebook and Instagram weren't too bad. But, you know, you get different demographics there. Actually, surprisingly, though, TikTok was great. I would actually say that TikTok is like heaven compared to Reddit. It's amazing. Well, we're going to go through some of these comments and try to clarify these misconceptions, because they keep coming up over and over again. And you know, the best I can do is get it out there, the truth, right? I mean, you can hear it from the horse's mouth tonight. Jamie Wolf is not with us tonight. She's visiting family for the holidays. And I'm about to be done. This is my last work day for the next week, so I'm going to be taking it easy after this. Tracy has one more day at our mutual business. But other than that, we're going to just start taking it easy ourselves. I wanted to bring to you 8 episodes this season. Unfortunately, the technical difficulties didn't allow it. But Brendan and I are currently working on season 9 right now, and I think we've got 17 episodes in the works, which is going to be the largest season we've ever done, assuming we are able to do all that without any kind of issues. But I think we got a lot to look forward to, and it's going to start in February, right around Ash Wednesday, or the week of Ash Wednesday, I think. I think it's around Valentine's Day. So halfway through February, we're going to be back, and you're going to have us all the way to the summer. Okay. So we got a good show for you tonight. It's going to be interesting. We have, of course, from Australia, Father Chris with us. How you doing, Father?
I'm pretty well. Yeah, I'm calling you from Sydney today.
Oh, so, okay. Great.
Had a little business trip down here, so staying in. I'm a member of these. I'm a member of the Newcastle Club in Newcastle. These sort of they started off as gentlemen's clubs, but of course now most of them are mixed, and they have clubs all over the world. So when I've dialed in from Glasgow and from Dublin and from various other places, I've invariably been in one of these clubs, and there is one in Sydney that I stay at as well. So I think the internet connection here is better than it is at my house. So this might be the best broadcast you've ever had of me.
I think you look quite clear. Yeah, I think it is the clearest we've ever had you. Audio's good, and like I said, I plan on upgrading some of our feed quality next season. We're going to run some tests probably and see how it goes. Maybe do one of the first episode without a guest.
You get a better upload speed and I've been to your house, so I know it's in the middle of nowhere. You get a better upload speed in your house in the deep dark woods of Georgia than I do in the second biggest city in New South Wales. So
that's really surprising, because from my old house, which was up in the foothills, which was also out there, but it was more, I guess, suburban than this is. This is more rural. But we used to get 500 megabytes upload speed. So this is quite a shocker to go from, 500, being used to 500, down to 15.
But I don't think I've ever seen 500 uploads. Well, I have in England, but not in Australia.
It's actually more than you can than you actually need on current devices. It's really more for the future. But the thing that it does, and the benefit to having it, and you might say, like, why do you even need that? It also increases the bandwidth. So you could have multiple devices all uploading data in large quantities without any buffering or any kind of problem. So that's the benefit to it. It's not any faster. It's not like, it is faster, but eventually you cap out. You reach a point where even your network card can only get so much data out there. So what it does at that point, once you've reached the cap, is as I understand it, I'm no IT professional, but as I understand it, although I'm a hell of a lot better than the people that have been trying to help me around here, so I guess I am an IT professional.
Yeah, you're a lot better than me. Had I been there to help you, it would have taken you a lot longer, but you would have been more drunk. So
that's true. So who knows how that would have gone, right? Although it takes a lot to get me drunk, so that would have been a lot of whiskey.
Me too.
Yeah. Oh yes, we have some good times ahead, Father. We have some good times ahead.
We do.
Anyway, we are back and we are working, and like I said, I've been watching that feed. It has been solid. There hasn't been any drops, and usually I see the pattern go up and down, up and down. There's a little graph here, and it goes up and down, up and down. And right now, it's a solid line, and it's 4 bars for those of you who are, want to relate it to how you understand your connection with your cell phones. It's like having 4 bars. Okay. So we should be good for tonight. And I think the little link that we're doing between consoles for my son upstairs, I think that will be done shortly, if it's not already. And they're going to turn those devices off. So should we be good for the rest of the night? Also from Tennessee, we have Brandon with us. How you doing, Brandon?
Doing pretty good. At least my internet hasn't messed up as your has, but doing what we can.
We'll do it. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. You do what you can. I think we finally have it worked out. And if I had known, all somebody had to tell me is like, you got this little setting. There's a setting in your network card that does this thing. You might want to turn that off. No, it was, I spent 5 hours last week. So when the show didn't go live, I spent the whole 3 hours of that show sitting right here trying to figure out why it wasn't working. And the only thing I could conclude at that time was that the Ethernet cable had gone bad. The reason I knew it didn't is because when I plugged it into a different Ethernet cable in a different room, it still was doing it. So I'm like, there's no way both Ethernet cables went bad. I bought both of these when I moved into this house because I needed long ones to go through the ceiling from the telecom room, which is right behind here. But it's actually further away than you might realize, and it has to go all the way through. So I needed a very long one. And so I bought brand new ones since I didn't have any currently that were as long as I needed. And then the library where I have another connection is all the way down that way. That's several more feet. And so I needed like 100 feet of cable to do this. And it was, so they were brand new. There's no way they should have gone bad. And I mean, Ethernet cables last forever anyway, right? I mean, they never go bad. I've never had one go bad. I'm not saying they can't, but the odds of two new ones going bad at the same time just didn't set right with me. So I was like, there's got to be something with the network card. Maybe the network card's gone bad. But when I plugged in a different computer, the other computer was having the same thing. So I knew it was something. And that's when I started breaking it down, realizing that these network cards have this setting. So if you're having issues, this is what I'm going to tell you, all of you to do, because this is not a problem that's isolated to me. Okay. If you're using a wired connection, not Wi-Fi, but if you're using a wired Ethernet connection, go to speedtest.net and run a speed test. Not right now, because you're streaming this and it's going to disrupt things. Make sure everything's off and run speedtest.net, and it's going to give you your upload and download speeds. Okay. If you have really good upload speed, but dismal I'm always dyslexic. If you have really good download speed, but really bad upload speed, like a lot lower than what your ISP says you should have, then you might want to look into your network card settings on your device manager and turn off the LSO. Okay. If you do that, you should be golden. Okay. Anyway, let's get started with questions and comments from the ether. Most of these are going to be comments from the ether, and we're going to be focusing almost predominantly, unless we get done early, we're going to focus predominantly on the Ghost Adventures that we did recently. And if you watched Ghost Adventures, a lot of you that are fans of this show are fans of that one and found me through Ghost Adventures, of course. It's a big show, probably the biggest paranormal show in the air right now. Whether you love it or hate it, you can't deny that. The last one that we were on, Jamie Wolf and myself, was Nightmare Northridge, which dealt with a paramedic who had a traumatic experience on the job that led to a malevolent attachment that we were able to successfully remove. And I think even Zach had gotten so fed up with all the constant comments about what happened to the family, all these episodes we've done. Everyone wants to know what happened. Rightfully so. It's not really the audience's fault. I think the show should have always told you. But sometimes we don't even know. Sometimes the families don't even communicate to us. So it's hard for, us to always put in, by the time the show airs, a response that says, look, situation's resolved. Sometimes it's still being worked by the time it airs. These things are not instantaneously completed, and we're going to talk about that tonight. But anyway, this show had that satisfaction. I got a lot of people telling me they loved the fact that there was that closing commentary at the end that showed that what we went there to do was successful, and that the problem is resolved for this client. So I guess, Brandon, you had the awful task that I put you on of going through all of these miserable internet sites to find all of these negative and even positive, even the positive ones. I noticed that somebody was commenting on how good I looked on television. Thank you for that, I guess. That was really funny. It was good, but it was like, hey, a good one, I mean, I'll take it. It's better than it's better than the criticisms, right? But most of them are criticisms that I asked Brandon to find so that we can clear them up. So we're going to clear the air right now. If you are a fan of Ghost Adventures, and if you or even if you're not, if you're a big critic of Ghost Adventures, then you're a big critic of me. I invite you to stay through this next segment, this, for the next 40 minutes, and listen to my answers. I'm going to clear up a lot of this stuff. Okay. Brandon, what do we have? What's the first one?
Oh boy. So as you said, the majority of the negative comments came from Reddit.
Yeah.
The first user, in regards to you and Jamie, said, no mention of mental health, seeking counseling, therapy, nothing. Straight to demonic possession and involving a clergy not associated with the Roman Catholic Church.
Okay, let's deal with the two. So you got one. The first concern is that there's no mention of anything psychological, any kind of psychological or conventional assistance. And then the second complaint is that he's bringing in clergy that's not associated with the Roman Catholic Church. So let's deal with the first one. Okay. We are there. I've said this before, but I guess I have to keep repeating it after every episode that I'm on, because this won't be the last episode I'm on, and this won't be the last time we have to answer this. You are watching 42 minutes of 8, 9, 10, sometimes 15 hours. Okay. You're getting 42 of the best minutes. You're not getting private conversation. You're not getting privileged information between the priest and the client. Okay. You're just getting the 42 minutes of action that is the entertaining part of the show. Okay. That's the part that gets aired. That's the part that becomes the episode. You're not seeing in fact, you didn't even see 1 minute. I mean, we maybe got 1 minute, maybe 1 minute of my conversation with the client. I spent more than an hour, probably 2 hours, talking to him. All right. Getting to the bottom of things. And then even more time after we wrapped, where I went through in extensive detail his treatment plan, which absolutely involves medical and psychological help. I even gave him a referral. Okay. So there's no mention of it because the show's called Ghost Adventures. It's not called Psychiatric Adventures. Okay. It's Ghost Adventures.
How boring would that be?
Exactly. Who wants to watch that? Right? So it's an idiotic comment to even suggest, to even insinuate. First of all, and then the other thing I need to really clarify here is that let's not forget, I don't have a degree in religion or theology. My degree is in philosophy and psychology. In fact, my accredited university degree is psychology. Okay? So I'm actually more of a psychologist first than I am a priest. And I always evaluate things from the psychological vantage point. Any one of my students is going to tell you that that is true. Only a faceless idiot from the internet would insinuate otherwise. It's clearly you've never done any actual research on any of my actual credentials or work. Okay, so you would have been able to draw this conclusion on your own and say, well, it's only 42 minutes, so clearly we're not seeing everything. But you want to jump the gun immediately into the criticism.
But even if it was 42 minutes, which obviously is absurd, even if it was,
yeah.
Do they presume? I mean, I think this is a comment that basically someone's trying to say, I know you've got to think about X, Y, and Z, and I want to tell the whole world how clever I am. I think that's really the purpose of the post. I don't think it's about you at all. Mm-hmm. But even if it was just based on this 42 minutes, do they not think that perhaps maybe before they call Ghost Adventures, they've done all those usual normal things that everybody would do? I mean, why is that on you?
The first thing, the first thing that Zach tells me when he tells me that he's got a case and we start getting into conversation about availability to go and shoot. All right. The first thing out of Zach's mouth is the evaluation of the client. You know, if there's a history of mental illness, if there's any kind of medical stuff going on, any history of substance abuse, any signs of this stuff, that's the first stuff out of Zach's mouth. Okay, so you're not going to see all that, but that's what I see. Okay, so
I'm gonna let you into everybody into the magic circle of Metropolitan Police terms that probably aren't used anymore, and one of them is caller is E6. Okay, now E6 is the postcode for barking in London. So the first thing you assess is the caller barking mad. So that's what you're describing, right?
That's pretty much it. And I can tell you right now, there have been...
Because he doesn't want to be on a show with someone who's barking mad.
No, it wouldn't serve the purpose of the show either. So even if you want to argue, which is not true, but even if somebody that's really critical of Zach Bagans wants to argue that he's only in it for the money and for the fame or whatever they would argue or claim that Zach is, even if you want to argue that, which is not true, by the way, but if you wanted to, even if it were true, it would not serve the show's credibility at all to put people on who are clearly mentally ill without actual paranormal disturbances or something that can be ruled out by something more conventional. Okay. So the show's not going to get into that because a lot of it is, first of all, personal. Okay. And they don't, you as the audience don't need to be seeing this person who's clearly hurting having a private conversation with his pastor. You don't need to see that. That is not, you're not entitled to see that.
You could obviously tell that by the edit. Like, you know, the edit was actually quite
bad. It was a bad, obviously. I would say this was the worst.
I think it was bad because it was hard though, you know?
It was hard, but I would say I liked the episode, and I was actually told by many people that it was their favorite one so to date. It might be that they haven't seen me on in a while, so they were just happy to have another episode that dealt with this topic, because there's the fan base is very divided on it. So there's people that really love it. I think the majority actually really love these episodes, and then there's a subset that hates them and wants to go back to the old Ghost Adventures with Nick, where they do the X cameras and the lockdown, and they just travel the world going to haunted locations. I understand both points of view. I can understand why people might not want to see something that's more like a house calls kind of experience on Ghost Adventures. I get it. And I understand that. But I don't produce the show, and that's those are Zach's choices, and clearly his formula works, because a lot of complaints about Zach is he's only in it for the money. Well, yeah, clearly he's made good money. His formula works. That's why he makes good money. Okay, so you can criticize him for being successful. That's exactly what you're doing when you say those things. I applaud the man for being successful. I think he's brilliant. Okay, you might not like him, but I think he's done a great job. I think you wish, most of you out there who hate him wish you could be as successful as he is doing what he does. Okay, I promise you that. But anyway, that is the reality of it, is that Zach takes it very seriously. I take it very seriously. And the stuff that's not appropriate to be aired doesn't get aired, plain and simple. So there's always psychological conversation. There's always referrals, even if the person doesn't need it. Even if they say, you know what? Because every now and then you'll do a case and you do the rites of exorcism or solemn blessing or whatever it is that is needed, house ceilings, all the stuff that we do, that you've seen me do on the show. And I can tell you right now, all right, there have been cases where we've done all that stuff and the client's like, oh my God, it's gone. Like instantaneously, like the one trip was all it took. But even in those circumstances, I still give referrals out. I still do. But when I'm doing a case, okay, when we're doing the case through the order of exorcists, we do this stuff ourselves. All right. Which means that before I even step foot in a client's house, I need a psychological evaluation from whatever psychologist they choose. We don't have one on staff in this jurisdiction. But what they do is that we require them to go and get one. And then we also want a physical. We want a medical report, and only after I've seen that those things are cleared do we then start to take the paranormal route more seriously. But even then, it's still just a pastoral visit. So the criticism that, oh, you're calling in an exorcist when this guy needs psychiatric care. Okay, so tell
Why
me.
not both?
Tell me exactly how pastoral care is going to hurt him. What harm is there? And if the person is spiritually oriented, because clearly they are, Zach's not going to bring me. There's been many cases that you've seen on Ghost Adventures where people have said, they did this episode. Where were you? Why didn't they have Bishop Brian on this episode? Because the client didn't want Bishop Brian. The client isn't, focused on Christianity or doesn't believe in Christianity. They don't want me. Okay, so Zach gets them somebody that they can relate to. So sometimes it's a medium. If that's their spirituality, then that's what they go with. Zach tries to respect where they are. He just doesn't bring an exorcist into everything. If the person has a Christian orientation, then that's when I come in. And how is going in to give a blessing and pray over them harm? Exorcism is the last resort, and most of the time we don't perform it on a person. What you see is typically just a minor exorcism, which is really just a very aggressive blessing. You can't.
Also, this is a false division.
Yeah.
I mean, where do people think counseling and eventually psychotherapy came from?
Where it came from? Yeah, exactly. There you go.
It came from pastoral ministry by the church.
Yeah, and
so. I've always kind of eschewed this sort of division. I mean, I've done counseling courses, but primarily, I've been a pastor to several large congregations, towns of people. I don't have a psychology degree. That's not the point, But I've been pastor to far more people than any individual psychologist that's lived in those towns.
Right.
Psychology is a sort of, which I value, is an expert end of a certain type of pastoral care.
Right.
But it's not all pastoral care. Otherwise, if your 4-year-old fell over in the street, you'd need to call a psychiatrist to help them deal with the trauma. No, mum normally deals with that trauma by giving him a cuddle. That's pastoral care. That's counselling.
Yep.
So you don't need to instantly call somebody that's got master's degree in psychology.
It's just part of the materialism. It's materialist mentality. It's that they see psychology
credentialism
as the safe way now, because it can just immediately eliminate any kind of influence of God or any talk of religion into the mix. And so they respect.
Which is where that comment's coming from, I think.
It is. Oh, absolutely it is. Most of these comments
come from... That's a Richard Dawkins comment, It
is. Absolutely. Absolutely it is. We had another one on Facebook that I think Brandon will get to. So the second part of that question was, why call in a bishop who's not even affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church? Well, newsflash, everybody, but every Christian denomination recognizes exorcism. Every single one.
Even outside Christianity.
Even outside. Buddhism, Islam, even Judaism has a framework. Shamanism has a framework for exorcism. It's not just a Roman Catholic thing. It's every denomination has to have a protocol in place. Now, some churches absolutely adamantly refuse to deal with it. And it is true that they kind of push it off on the Roman Catholic Church because they see it as, oh, well, the Roman Catholic Church knows how to deal with this. I'm not touching the devil. And so they kind of just like refer out. But, there's
also nothing, there's no such thing as the Roman Catholic Church.
I know.
This terminology is used in census data and,
it is.
But there's no such I know you know this, but there's no such thing as the Roman Catholic Church. In the Creed, we believe one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Now, the Church of Rome and those people in communion with her are certainly part of the Catholic Church. But if we want to talk about the Roman Catholic Church, well, what about the Marianites? They're in communion with Rome.
The Melkites, the Ruthenians,
Eastern Catholic. Yeah. So but also, even outside of that, the so-called Roman Catholic Church, I'll use it for the terminology of this idiot, has always recognized the Orthodox churches as fully Catholic, fully valid, fully everything. And there's loads more that go on to that. It's a self-revelatory, idiotic comment.
And I'm going to tell you, this is going to be a big one for people. But Do you know who the Archdiocese of Atlanta does not have any protocol for these kinds of cases? Do you know?
Amazing.
Do you know what the Roman Catholic now, I'm going to use your terminology. Do you know who the Roman Catholic clergy call or refer these clients out to? Me.
I can guess.
Me. Me. You know how I ended up on Ghost Adventures? Because Rolling Stone magazine did an article about me. You know who referred me to the Rolling Stone magazine? The local clergy of the Archdiocese of Atlanta in the Roman Catholic Church. Okay. So look, I'm not going to name names. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but, you know, they know we're successful at it, and they can't formally respect what we do because of the red tape and the politics of religion, where, you know, we are not in communion. And so they have to maintain that kind of perceived distance. We don't, because we don't really have those kinds of concepts, but we're not in communion with the Roman Catholic Church. But a lot of them respect what I do. They just do it privately or quietly.
But only because they don't want to be. You would happily be in communion with them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. To be, right? We would. It's on our site.
The block is not on your end.
It is not on our
end.
It's on. In fact, people can go. You can go to our FAQ on our website, esotericcatholic.org or nicolan.org, and click on the FAQ. It has all of our canons on there as well, and you can see. I think it's really early into it. It's a long document, but there's very early on, you'll see that we clearly state that we are open to absolutely being in full communion with the Church of Rome. It is basically the Church of Rome that does not want to be in full communion with us. But that does not mean they don't recognize the validity of my orders or the success of the work that I do. But
also, just very, very quietly, Orthodox churches up and down, well, the world, but especially in the United States of America, do exorcisms all the time, thoroughly effectively, with absolutely no controversy whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's true. And for the Orthodox churches, they don't see exorcism as a big deal. Nope. They would actually go as far as to say that and this is kind of my philosophy with exorcism. The Orthodox view on exorcism is that all baptized Christians are exorcists, every single one.
Yes.
And so really the priest is just facilitator. Christ is ultimately the power behind it, but by virtue of your baptism, you have already been empowered with it. And then the priest is there to facilitate that interaction, sort of in the same way that a sacramental blessing is more significant than just a basic familial blessing in that way. And so it carries more weight because you have the authority of the church working with you. That's why having a priest as your exorcist is important. But ultimately, when an exorcism is performed, it's the individual who's driving that thing out of them through the grace that the priest is providing, the grace that is Christ. Okay, it's not, again, I can't emphasize, no exorcist is Gandalf. This is not wizardry, all right? This is not magic. It's not witchcraft. It is grace, and we're just instruments of grace. We're conduits of grace, but ultimately the grace has to work with you. You have to make the decision. Even exorcism requires the choice of free will and that volitional decision.
It's a bit like baptism. I mean, the church recognizes baptisms conducted by any Christian in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. You don't have to be ordained to baptize a person validly. But the church, the good order of the church suggests that it should be somebody who's ordained, whether it's a deacon or a priest or a bishop, so that, we can be sure that the formula, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy
correctly,
Spirit. Yeah. The advantage for the exorcist being a priest is that they can hear a confession. That's the unique thing about a priest in an exorcism compared to anybody else. And often attachments, they can be related to unconfessed sins.
Yeah. And that's, in many cases, confession is really what's needed, not really exorcism.
And you want to talk about therapy? There's no better therapy than a good confession.
Well, that's another thing that's where therapy came from. A lot of it came from the confession relationship.
The difference is you get absolution in the church, then you have to move on.
That's
the
right.
difference.
Yeah, and you have to externalize it in a way that that makes it real. You can't just bury it in repression. Psychology is always about trying to dig out repression when confession does that so much better. All right, Brandon, what's our next one?
So this one you might not like, and you might have to take a lot of time to explain it. But this person commented, anyone else get mad when Brian started blaming Kevin towards the end because he was negligent with his faith and needs to develop his relationship with God more?
Okay, so when Father Chris said that the episode was kind of edited poorly, it was choppy and maybe not their fault because there was just so much going on. I do think it was probably the one episode I was on that suffered the most from the editing job. So much was cut out. What you don't see in that scene, you can clearly tell if you go back and watch it that you're catching the end of a very long conversation. You can definitely tell that even with the editing job. But what you don't see is what precipitated that very comment that I made was the discussion I had with Kevin, where he absolutely admitted that he's been negligent with his faith. And so one of the main aspects of my responsibility as a pastor is to get him back into the grace of the church. And so, what you're seeing there was what was actually communion. That was the end of the rite of the Eucharist outside of Mass. And they didn't show you that, did they? And they didn't show you him talking about how he wants to get back into the church and everything. And so they're looking at all this religious paraphernalia all over the house. That was his mother. Okay, he had struggled with his faith, and it was all recorded, and it was all part of it just didn't make the final cut of the episode. And there's no shame in this. This is the number one thing we see. So no, I wasn't blaming him. I was reaffirming to him in order to assure that what we do here today is going to stick. You have to get yourself right with God. Now, I know all you fucking atheists out there can't accept that as a reality, but I'm not talking to you, and I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to him. Okay.
Well, and we just think they're wrong. Atheists are wrong.
They are.
Simple as that.
It's a simple reality.
And they say we're wrong, and that's the end of the conversation.
Well, we've got history on our side. They don't. As far as a belief system, atheism is an infant compared to people of faith. And I'm not just talking religion. I'm not talking just Christianity. I'm talking any religion. Religion is a lot older than atheism. In fact, never was there a time in history where people didn't believe in something. It was only with the advent of the Renaissance and the obsession with science where it started to butt heads. And rationality, the age of enlightenment, all that stuff.
But and of course, atheism is totally irrational, of course, because they presuppose a world that has laws.
Yeah.
Of nature,
but
they don't. They can't recognize that. Therefore, there must be a lawgiver. None of it holds together. But you're not talking to them, and it's totally standard advice to say to somebody. Well, and also an affirmation that you're not claiming to be Gandalf, that you're not claiming to be a wizard, that you're saying no. There's no need for people like me if you are going to Mass, receiving the sacraments, keeping your conscience clear, and then if you still have spiritual warfare, it's God's will. That's it.
Yeah. Put me out of a job. I would love to be you all to put me out of a job. Please do. I would love to just get back into regular pastoral work, and just leave all of this, the darkness of the Yetzirah behind. I'd love it. Just deal with my own. Believe me, my own Yetzirah is bad enough. I don't need yours.
Same.
Yeah. So that's another idiotic, asinine comment because again, you're acting like I was only there for 42 minutes. And I say 42 minutes because you have an hour episode, right? But it's not really an hour once you factor in all the commercial breaks. You're getting about 42 minutes of footage. And then also keep in mind that you're getting several days worth of footage where the first part of every Ghost Adventures is the guys going there to do the preliminary investigation, where I'm not even there yet. So you're really only getting about 20 minutes of me, maybe 30 minutes. And in that time, that 30 minutes, you're seeing what's taking place over 10 hours. So I don't know how, some of you out there that have this mindset, I don't know how you can't rationalize that yourself. I don't know how you can't figure that out yourself. I think, Father Chris, you're right. I think they just want to be, it's not about me. It's not about the show. They just want to look so clever, but you're not looking clever. You're looking really freaking stupid. And anybody with half a brain can see it. So I guess, if Reddit's where you're popular, well, that should tell you what kind of mentality or intellect the people who use Reddit have.
Well, I don't think they're scholars.
No, they're definitely not scholars. No, it's not a scholar. No, definitely not. It's the school of idiocy. I think you get a degree and being fucked up.
But also, I mean, going back to the whole. I'm not surprised that it triggers somebody that a clergyman would say, well, actually, you've actually got to take your faith seriously and, go to church and all these things. That's what appalls people, because they don't want to have to sacrifice or do anything. But and it's not just atheists. A lot of, people that are theists, let alone, and Christians, will... they really have this anointed view of the world, where they think some utopia is possible. We just need more time or more technology or whatever it might be. And actually, we fundamentally don't have that view of the world. We have a tragic view of the world, that in fact we're created with sin inside us and all around us, and that life is actually about struggle and sacrifice. And to quote Churchill, to keep buggering on regardless. And that's actually, this is why a conversation can't take place between people who have such different worldviews. The only thing you can do is describe the worldviews and own one or the other. And I think, well, I know my view is, well, we have this tragic vision of the world, and you have this anointed vision of the world. So we actually do think that there are consequences for moral decisions that you make or that have been made around you that you've been caught up in. So we have a different that's our vision, and we would say that not all, but a lot of these spiritual problems that people find themselves in are generated by that. Whether it's soldiers returning from war, where there's been evil and moral chaos all around them, or whether it's somebody in their own life just corrupting their own nature by cooperating with sin. But if you have a worldview that doesn't allow for sin, doesn't allow for, I think I would say basically a moral dimension. If you think that everyone in the world is just another widget, who just needs the right stimulation, the right chemicals, the right financial input to be perfect.
Well, they don't want to also accept. They don't want to accept when they watch an episode like this. They don't want to accept that this method works, because that challenges everything they believe in. That challenges everything they believe in.
Of you being right. The consequences of you being right mean they have to do something.
Yeah, and that's scary. That's scary to them, because what if all of this is, what if all of this thing that religion talks about is real? Then they're in deep shit, and they know it. So the only way they can maintain the confidence in that mentality is that I have to be wrong. So anything they see that would indicate even remotely that maybe there's some truth to this, they have to discount it. They have to discredit. They have to say I'm an actor. They have to say that Zach Bagans is just in it for the money. I'm just in it for the money. That's another comment that I think Brandon's going to get to here. Somebody said that one on Facebook. It's like, boy, if I'm in it for the money. Where is it? I mean, if I'm in it for the money, show me the money then. Where is it? Because I'm not seeing it.
but it's also a fundamentally unscientific approach, because the people that claim to be science is everything, they take an a priori view to discount something. Well, a scientist doesn't do that. A true scientist, of course, the scientific method comes from the church because it's an extension of hermeneutics, right? Is that you approach something looking at the data without a prejudiced view, and then you look at the results and the outcomes. And it strikes me so unscientific to ignore outcomes that involve moral outcomes, that involve the way that people exist in the world, that they think about the world, to disregard the fact that there's an impulse, for example, for human beings to acknowledge a supreme being. Is profoundly unscientific. How can you discredit the fact that people have this natural tendency to believe in God?
They'll just argue it's an evolutionary coping mechanism for dealing with the reality, being able to be aware of the reality of death. That's what they'll argue. Which is
that's their version of God of the gaps. See, they accuse Christians or theists of God of the gaps.
Yeah.
They have time of the gaps. We don't know yet, but we will know.
Yeah.
Well, what's the difference philosophically between saying God of the gaps or time of the gaps? There's no difference. So I'm sorry, you can't have that. It's there's a bad argument because you can't live by it.
It is. What's our next one, Brandon?
So this one, the audience is going to have to excuse me.
Go right ahead. We've always been able to use all the vulgarity you want on this show. It's never going to air on mainstream radio, so don't worry about it.
Okay. Honestly, this episode just made me feel so angry. That poor man went through a truly traumatizing experience. He needs genuine psychological help to work through his PTSD. The fucking bishop probably made things so much worse, making Kevin pull out the uniform he was wearing that night and then blatantly telling him that it was his fault for slacking his worship of God. Disgusting.
I think we've addressed that.
I think we did. I mean, again, all of that is addressed by the other 10 hours that you didn't get to see. And
but I guess one thing you could address was the reasoning behind him needing to pull out his uniform.
Okay, so
why wouldn't you confront the things you're afraid of?
And that's exactly
basic therapy.
Thank you, Father Chris just basically said it. You attachments are always and this is as psychological as it is spiritual. Okay, whichever worldview you want to adopt as your primary, it does not matter. The formula is the same. Attachments, whether they be spiritual in nature or in psychology, it just calls them trauma, but they're the same damn thing, are always going to be connected to the source of that trauma. And so for him, after all of the conversation you don't get to see, all the evaluation, all of the work, okay, for him, it was the uniform that he was wearing on the night that he had that traumatic experience. And so what harm? I mean, you're talking about being, bringing in a fucking bishop, okay? Presumably because what? It's too superstitious for you. But how superstitious is it for you to say that blessing a uniform is going to cause him irrevocable harm? That sounds a hell of a lot more superstitious to me.
But also he kept it, right? Now that's psychologically interesting. So he's had this terrible experience, and I've worked in a uniformed organization. If you want to throw away a uniform, you can. Yeah. It doesn't take much. You just say, "This got a bit of blood on it. Poof, get me a new one." And so and no one ever argues anyway. For the very reasons that you got him to confront it. Yeah. And so if he kept it in his house, he's already confronted with that uniform all the time, every day. Yes. He's just not actually faced it up. And so is it not much better, forget about being a clergyman, is it not much better advice if you're his mother, father, brother, friend, to say, let's confront this thing that is associated with such terrible things, and yes, we're clergymen, so we'll bless the thing. That's our way of disposing with it. Somebody else might throw it in a fire. Well,
that was my first suggestion. I mean, but I respected the client's wishes. I did say, clearly this is the attachment point for this particular issue that you're describing. So what I would recommend is we we've done it before. And Zach and I kind of was laughing because it's like, we like to burn things. We'll start a holy fire and we'll throw the damn thing in. But he saw that uniform as almost like a diploma. He had to work really hard to earn it, and it represented all that hard work. So he didn't want to get rid of it. So I said, okay, well then we're going to bless and exercise it to just kind of neutralize whatever negativity might be still attached to it. And whether you believe in religion or not, whether you believe in spirituality or not, that has a profound psychological effect on the person when you do that, when a priest does that. Okay, particularly if you are doing this for a very devout Roman Catholic family that he was a part of. Now, granted, he did say he wasn't as practicing as he wanted to be or should have been, but we fixed that. Okay, that was part of my role there that night. Okay, but his family's very devout. And isn't it interesting? This is the first time we've had a very devout Roman Catholic family on the show, and they had the most immediate success. Okay, so that goes to show you that.
But also, going back to the question, why call you out instead of somebody in full communion with the Church of Rome? Well, where was their priest?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times where
was their priest?
They're just
we know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go at their parish priest. I mean, they're boxed in to a great extent.
They are.
So
but a lot of them don't want to deal with it at all.
But the question is, my retort to somebody who would say, "Oh, you're completely invalid and nothing," I wouldn't even get into that. I'd say, where's their priest then? Where's your Church of Rome priest then to come and do this?
Yeah, well, he didn't want to. I don't think. I don't know. I don't really know. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be honest. I don't really know the answer to that one because that never really came up in our interactions. Yeah. I was just really concerned about
overall,
helping
that's why people call you. That's
true, and that's why those priests send them to me. I mean, and they do. Yeah. Brandon, we probably have time for one more. How many more do you have there?
A lot.
Okay. We might have to continue this next time, which will be really, we're talking February, but what's our next one?
So I'm trying to see, because you actually answered a bunch of them.
Try to find one that might be unique, and we'll try to answer that.
Might be unique. Oh, okay. Something regarding the evidence or the footage. This person commented, 8 minutes left in the episode. They claimed that there's something moving behind him in the doorway. A few seconds later, you see the bishop guy and his assistant standing there with a cell phone held up for some light so he can read. And this same shadow is being cast in the same area right behind him. Same exact shape. It's just the shadow of his shoulder and chin.
Yeah. In fact, my wife was way ahead of you on that one. When she saw the episode the first time, that's the first thing she said. And I agree with her. I think it is absolutely just a shadow, and that can happen. Look, you can have people that are doing, the same investigation, and one sees it, can debunk it. The other one can't. It happens. I didn't see it at first. I had to remind it several times to see what she was talking about. But, there are other people that noticed it, and that happens, but good job. Okay. So, you debunked that particular thing. I don't think there was a whole lot of anomaly in that house outside of, the things that you did see that, were mostly a reaction with the client himself. Some of the other comments I saw on Facebook involved me starting my own church. I think we've beat that horse to death. I did not start my own church. Okay. The Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church is a tradition of the independent sacramental movement under and in communion with the old Catholic Church, which is hundreds of years old. I wasn't around hundreds of years ago, so I can't take any credit for that. And the reality also is that the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church as a tradition was not established by me. That was established by a conglomeration of a group of Roman Catholics, Russian Orthodox, independent Catholics, and some non-Christians who were sick of the red tape and the bullshit of conventional religion and felt that there was a way to do it better. And the Nicolaitan Church became the instrument through which they had envisioned this, and I was appointed as its administrator and spiritual leader. They elevated me to this role. I did not take it. I did not assume it for myself. I didn't even want it. I didn't even want to be a bishop, let alone the patriarch of a entirely different tradition. So let's get facts straight here. You're making shit up when you don't know. Some of you out there, when you don't know, you just make the shit up. Okay, so I don't appreciate it, and you're not helping your credibility by concocting lies, because this is all very easily found data if you actually spend time doing the research to actually look into my work. But if you did that, then you might be like, oh, the guy's knows what he's talking about. Oh, he's actually not a bad guy. Then you have no target left now. And then you're going to feel like an asshole for it. So you don't want to deal with that guilt, which is why you don't do the research. I know the whole, look, I said it early in the show. I'm a psychologist before I'm a priest. Okay. My degree is in psychology, not religion. I'm 10 steps ahead of you. Okay. You can't put a fast one on me. And I know exactly what you're thinking before you're probably even thinking it. All right. And when you're full of shit, you're full of shit, and I'm calling you full of shit. All right, we're going to take our break here. And I guess we can always, if there's other ones, Brandon, just let me know, and maybe we can do some kind of special segment on TikTok to answer the rest. Don't go away.
I am here in the middle of nowhere. There is no there, it is cold there, but I am safe and I am warm. Although it's hard, I know I gotta keep up. No time to lay, to drift away. I fill my space, I spend my time down the rabbit hole again. And as I fall, I can feel the pain. You can't tell me where to go, so I don't know, and just go with the flow. I go with the flow. I'm falling up, I'm falling down, from the sky and from the ground. Up above just like below, and I don't know where I should go. I'm out of love, but I guess I deserved it. Trying to hide, to pass you by. I'm getting down, feeling fine. I'm light as air, no one can reach me. Lost in a dream, lost in between. Let's keep on flying, let's keep on breathing. I'm falling up, I'm falling down, from the sky and from the ground. Up above just like below, and I don't know where I should go.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of Vestiges After Dark. Well, a nice, colorful, lively beginning to the show, I think. Yeah, I'm sorry for getting so aggressive with my commentary and speech with idiocy like we dealt with, but when you're inundated with it all the time, believe me, you'd probably be worse than I am. Anyway, we're shifting gears here. Going to get on the subject of Japanese spirituality with returning guest JJ Johnson. Don't go away. Okay, so like I said, you can only put up with so much, and with the stress that comes with this job, and I'm not just talking about the pastoral work and the administrative headaches, dealing with constant negativity, whether you believe in demons or not. The work of an exorcist is constantly involving hostility and anger and fear and all these negative emotions you're dealing with from other people all the time. But then you got to deal with these computers, because I have to, not only do I have to host this show, but I have to engineer this show while we're live. And then when things go wrong, I have to be the IT professional. And believe me, it when you don't get paid a salary for any of it, you start to, your ego starts to say, what the hell am I doing? I mean, I must be out of my freaking mind. And sometimes I think I am. Now I do it because I think this does perform a good service. And that's the only reason why I do it. I think information is power. And I think this show is one of the few shows that you can tune into to get authentic information about things like religion and spirituality, and also, the paranormal and things of interest, but even psychology. And tonight is no exception, because we have a returning guest with us, JJ Johnson, who comes from a very small town in Tennessee and has always loved ghost stories. He studied ancient languages and got a master's degree from Harvard. He's also interested in Japanese myths about monsters and spirits. JJ has worked in technology for many years, but in 2017, he started the Southern Demonology podcast to talk about his interests and share his studies with others. Last time he was with us, he talked about Second Temple Judaism, in which he knows a great deal about, far more than I do, even on my best days. And today he's talking about Japanese spirituality, which is another subject that I only have a casual relationship to. So it's going to be a learning experience for me, as well as it is for sure for all of you. And I'm very much happy to welcome back JJ to the show. How you doing tonight, JJ?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. And I want to just first say thank you so much for your patience and the problems that we've had on both of your shows with the technical issues, which are now, thank God, resolved. We figured out exactly what the problem was. So it shouldn't ever happen again. But I really do appreciate you being flexible and coming on again this week, last minute.
Oh, it's no problem. I just hope that I'm not incurring any kind of a curse upon your broadcast. So.
The curse was a update is what it was. I guess that is what a modern day curse is that when your computer updates, it behaves like a curse because you don't see it coming, and it does all sorts of strange, mysterious stuff to the inner workings of your system until it completely shuts down and no longer works like it used to. That's kind of what the modern day curse is. And I guess IT professionals and all these guys that work with computers, they're really the modern day witch doctors who are, cursing everybody.
Well,
at least that's how it feels.
Way to relate my day to day with what I do in my off time. So I love that explanation.
There you go. There you go. Well, I am so happy that we can talk about Japanese spirituality because one of the things that I think I've always had a very passing fascination with is Asian culture. And I mean, anything that has to do with cuisines that I love, I get into the culture. So I love French cuisine, so I study a lot about French culture. I love both Chinese and Japanese cuisine, so I love the history of those cultures. And I just find, in particular, Japanese culture to be a unique anomaly in the world. There's really no culture in the world like it, not even in Asia. It's its own kind of thing, and their spirituality is very unique. And so I guess let's start off by, telling us, how did you come to study Japanese folklore and the tales of the yokai, and how did you get into all that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was at Harvard and I needed a way to decompress after classes. And so I began going into our apartment's common room after class and watching Adult Swim. And there were two shows that were on at the time, Dragon Ball Z and Gundam Wing. And Dragon Ball was fine, but the reactions that the characters would have in Gundam Wing were so perplexing to me that I had to understand the significance and the cultural ways in which people were talking to each other. I just had to know more. And so I began to study the language, got into more and more anime and drama, which are the live action shows. It directly translates to drama, but it stands for any kind of genre as long as it is a live as opposed to an animated type of show. And the more I studied, the more I fell in love. And of course, my love of all things paranormal got mixed into all of this. And once I noticed that they have an entirely huge catalog of yokai and yurei, then that was kind of it for me. And especially after living there for quite a while, my family is from there. I have become completely invested in learning everything that I possibly can. And while I will not, there are certain aspects I'm very knowledgeable in, some aspects in which I would defer to others. But yeah, it has been a passion for, the past 25 years, and I've loved every single bit of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, see, when I was first introduced to the yokai because of my son, who was, when he was much younger, was fascinated with this show on the air called Yokai Watch.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know that one?
I do, unfortunately.
It was actually kind of an interesting premise. He had this little watch that would allow him to communicate with spirits of the dead, but these spirits would take on sort of archetypes, and they all were like, they would do things. So you had spirits that would cause sadness, and you had spirits that would, bring good luck or bad luck. It was very interesting. So it kind of, I guess, very loosely touched on Japanese mythology, but of course did it in the context of a children's show. So not terribly accurate at the same time. I mean, I'm sure there's no watch that lets you see the spirits, although that would be kind of cool if there were. But I found it interesting. That's when I first learned about the yokai and did some research on it. So I guess to describe the difference between the yokai and the Yurei. Yurei. Thank you.
Yep. Japanese R's are hard for me to begin with, but Japanese R's are in a class in and of themselves. So it may sound like I'm saying a soft D, but that is how it's done. So so yokai are traditionally monsters, also called bakemono, and they encompass things like oni, which are ogres, tengu, which are winged spirit messengers, which are often very mischievous and love to play tricks on people at the best of times, along with a whole host of others. Whereas Yurei are spirits, they are ghosts. And literally translated, Yurei just means dim light in Japanese.
Okay. Interesting. So one of the, I guess, predominant yokai that you've looked at is, if I'm understanding it correctly, is the slit-mouthed girl. Is that a yokai?
Yeah, well, she is kind of a mix between the two.
Okay.
She could be called a spirit, but she has a physical form. At least she's able to directly affect the world around her. So most people would categorize her more as a yokai than anything else. In Japanese, her name is Kuchisake Onna, which is literally slit mouth woman. And her popularity kind of grew back in 1979 as there was a reported incident amongst some elementary school students who were walking to school, and then they were chased after a woman who was wearing a mask and carrying a huge pair of scissors. And it was a real documented case, but that got conflated with the myth of Kuchisake Onna, and then it kind of took off. But yeah, what's purported to happen is that she will especially stalk young men or older boys as they're walking back from home in the dark. And she wears a mask so you can't see her deformity. And then she'll ask them, "Kirei desho? I'm beautiful, aren't I?" And if they say yes, then she rips away the mask and then she'll kill them. If they say no, then you're still murdered. And so most people will say, well, the only way to do it is you ask her, well, am I beautiful? And then that leaves her confused, and then you can make your getaway. Or you just, like everyone does, carry some cinnamon in your pocket and throw it at her.
Wow.
Why that has an effect, I have no idea. But
so do you think there's any, I guess, rational credibility to this, or do you dismiss it completely to the realm of imagination?
I would say it's imagination, and you can actually see this in real time. When I was in Japan last December, I was watching a daytime TV show, and they love talking about anything to do with ghosts or yokai. There's a huge attention draw, and they were discussing modern yokai that had been sighted in Japan. One of them was Hyako Hyako. And like the way that the TV show depicted was, there's a man on the third floor. He was typing away at his computer working, and he kept hearing this, "Hyako, Hyako." And he's like, "What is that?" And he looked around, and then he would see a head appear above his window and then disappear. And the way that they had it depicted, it was the spirit that would distend its torso and be able to reach up, and the sound that it was making as it was extending its torso up and down was that hyako hyako. Japanese is a very onomatopoeic language. In fact, you can use onomatopoeia almost anywhere as verbs, and so it's just an accepted thing. So that was one. But the other one that was really kind of interesting is there was supposedly an undead samurai wielding a katana, riding a motorcycle that was harassing people in a major metropolitan town.
Really? Okay.
And I'm like, don't hear that every day.
No,
Okay.
that's unique. That's definitely unique. Well, I guess we see it also in some of their cultural creations, like Japanese media, anime. We've already talked a little bit about that, but I think some of the scariest horror films are Japanese horror. I mean, particularly when they. We've had some that were converted, I guess you could, for lack of a better word. The Ring, yep. The other one there, I forget the one with the little boy on the elevator. Grudge, that's it. Thank you. It's kind of like Yokai, and it's in that same category, right?
Oh, it is. But those are Yurei.
Those are Yurei, okay.
Spirits.
Okay.
But they are vengeful spirits. And the thing is about Japanese ghosts is that they are very unlike Western tales. In Western tales, you get some really angry ones, but usually you encounter a ghost, it's scary unless it is a truly dark spirit. And that way you can usually kind of classify that as demonic in nature, right?
Right.
And Japanese stories, if you encounter a ghost, that's kind of the end of it. Like, that is a day that you're not going to probably walk out of alive because they are terrifying.
Interesting. So that's really fascinating. So obviously in Western culture, we in all three religions, all three Western primary religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, has I guess you could say rituals or practices or methodologies for dealing with malevolent spirits. Christianity obviously is the most prolific one for people today to know because of the exorcism genre in horror films. Kind of made it popular. The Exorcist made it kind of popular to know about. Do the Shinto or even Buddhist traditions in Japanese Buddhism, do they have methods for dealing with this, or do they just basically say you're shit out of luck? You saw one, you're done. There are some extremely practiced individuals with this. You typically more find this on the Shinto side, but of course Buddhism does not leave things out, mainly because it's a very lucrative market. I bet.
If you need assistance with something supernatural, you call a priest. Shinto priests will bring around some wards. They will chant. They will put up talismans. Buddhists will say sutras, and they will put up talismans. But there's a lot of interactions and a lot of practices that are really baked into everyday life in order to prevent unwanted attachments. Interesting.
So, do you know what these rituals would look like or what they do? Do you have any, examples of what their methodology is?
Yeah, the talismans are extremely unique, and those are directly imported from older Chinese traditions, and that's why you see a lot of this kind of imported over on the Buddhist side more so than anything else. But if there's a place that is haunted, they will craft these talismans, and they're typically yellow as a background with red lettering, although that's not strict, but the red lettering is very typical. And wherever there is a problem, they will then slap these talismans up, and these are usually a telltale sign that you're dealing with a haunted apato or apartment. And there's an entire segment of Japanese real estate in which you will come across listings that seem like they're really close to a subway, they're in the heart of a city, and yet they're dirt cheap. And you're like, why? That doesn't make any sense at all. And it's because someone either killed themselves in there, or people will move in, they will then move out immediately, and it gets a reputation for being absolutely haunted. And so, especially if you go into one of these places and you start to see these talismans around, you know it's probably not going to be a good time.
That's interesting. So, so where does this phenomenon fall in your worldview? Like, how do you classify this as, I guess, as a phenomenon? Is it? I mean, we kind of touched on it with it being, some of it being very mythological or fictional and imaginative, but is there sort of a paranormal credibility to some of the things that they're experiencing, in your opinion?
I would say yes. Like when I first went to Japan, I was always told, never walk by a graveyard. Just don't do it. And if you do happen to do so, make sure that you have purified salt at each of the entranceways to help drive off unwanted things from following you back. Always scoffed at that. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I've been in graveyards my entire life. I practically grew up in graveyards. I'm not terribly worried about it. And then I had an encounter myself, which scared the absolute ever-living crap out of me, to put it into a very nice way. And from that point on, I had purified salt on hand, and I never walked by a graveyard, which was kind of difficult because where I was staying at when I worked over there for a couple of years, my apartment was directly across from one of the oldest graveyards in Tokyo, which, yeah.
Wow. So there's definitely something to it then. Do you?
I think so.
Do you think they are like the Yurei? Do you think they're basically just the Japanese version of a demon, or do you think they are, like, I guess Buddhism calls them hungry ghosts or restless spirits? We might call them wrathful spirits here in the West. Do you think they're more like that, or do you think that there's something more supernatural about them, or significant in terms of them being even larger in life than just simply a deceased human?
Well, so there are 3 fantastic ghost stories which a lot of modern day Yurei are really derived from. And I think it would help to go through some of that in order to answer that question, if that would.
Yeah, let's hear it. I mean, the scarier the better. Let's hear it.
Cool. So how we imagine Yurei, and you see this.
Yurei. Let me make sure I'm saying this right. Yurei. Yurei. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And you see this in Ringu, or The Ring. You see this in Ju-on or The Grudge. And I will say that any of the American remakes of a Japanese horror industry are horrible. Like, they are not. If you haven't seen the original Japanese, then you are missing out.
Yeah.
Because they just take the fright level way up. In fact, have you ever seen Ju-on Origins?
I might have.
On Netflix. I don't recommend Netflix in general, but
it's on Netflix right now. I'll check to see. When did it come out?
It came out probably about 2 years ago.
Okay, then I haven't seen it. Seen it. Yeah.
But yeah, it is I think it's a 6-episode series that takes The Grudge and expands upon it.
Oh, wow.
And the individual stories, and they are really fantastic. But anyway, the main spirits that you see in those movies, Sadako, etc., they are really based upon the original depiction that was done by... let me actually locate his name here, because I don't always remember on top of my head. Yeah, Maruyama Okyu. In 1750, he had a geisha that he really loved, and then she passed away. We don't know why. And then after a fitful night of resting, he has a dream where she is looking down on him, and she's dressed in a white burial kimono. He couldn't see her feet, Her hair was very dark and straggly and hanging over her face. And when he woke up, he grabbed his brushes and he painted her. And that is the first depiction of a ghost.
Oh, wow.
And that has stayed in Japanese culture ever since. And that is how we picture them now. So, you know, if you know just even a little bit of the history of these things, then you can pick up on so much more and get so much enjoyment out of modern retellings of all of these events. But anyway, there are 3 great ghost stories, and they're called the San Yurei, and it is based upon Oiwa, Otsuyu, and Okiku. And each one of those names, they're all 3 women, and they all have a kind of a beautiful, well, 2 of them have a beautiful name to it. Like Okiku means chrysanthemum flower, Oyuki means snow, Oiwa means rock.
Okay.
And she was purported to be not exactly a very attractive lady. But she was married to a Ronin, a rogue samurai named Iemon. And Iemon found another woman, and he wanted to get rid of his current wife. And so he poisoned her. However, it wasn't a strong enough dose. And so, like, half of her face became paralyzed, half of her hair fell out, and there's a common saying in Japanese of "kami wa onna no inochi," or hair is a woman's life. And so this infuriated her, and she died, but that her spirit came back, and she absolutely tortured the ever-living heck out of Iemon, and she continues to do this to other men. So she is the ultimate kind of spirit of wrath that you see in a lot of cases. The second one is Otsuyu, which is a more sad story. She was a young woman who ran across a samurai, fell madly in love with him, and then she passed away before she met him again. However, she continued to visit him every night for several nights in a row. And he didn't know that she had died. And so he was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that she's back. And he had a monk friend who was like, no, she's dead. And if you continue to copulate with her at night, you're going to do the same thing's going to happen to you. And sure enough, after the 3rd night, the monk goes to get the samurai, and he sees a peony lantern outside of his door. And when he opens it up, there is her skeleton on top of his skeleton. It's a very kind of poetic story.
Yeah, definitely.
And the last one is Otsuyu. And Otsuyu is kind of the scariest one of all. And it's not really because her tale is particularly scary. It's really kind of sad. So she worked in a castle, and she was a serving girl for the house of Aoyama. And the family that she served had a set of 10 plates, osada, that are rarer and more expensive than mere money. And in some tales, the Lord tried to seduce Okiku and hides one of the plates until she complies with his demands. In other tales, one of the plates is broken and Okiku becomes a scapegoat. Regardless, she's done for. Like, her fate is sealed, and she's either thrown down or commits suicide by jumping down a well. And on eerie nights, you can still hear her counting the plates, hoping to get to 10, but never succeeding. And you can see all of these kind of elements in some of them more modern retellings.
Yeah.
You've got the well, you've got the long straggly hair, you have the white dresses, and all of these things are based upon stories that stretch all the way back to 1650. So, is this more of a cultural phenomenon than a real thing? I don't know, but I would say that Yurei go hand in hand with yokai. You have to remember that Japan is an island nation. It was isolated for so long. Only the Chinese really had influence upon it for a long time. The country is extremely remote. You had all of these little small villages buried deep in mountainsides. And it was very easy for ideas of monsters and things that go bump in the night to grow and to escalate. And that's what you have now. All of these stories from those dark times have been carried forward, because just like you find in a lot of places of the South where it says, if it's tradition, then it's good because tradition is good. Japanese society does not let go of anything that might even smack of cultural importance. Yeah. And so these things have hung around forever. Now, I think that you still got kind of two different classifications for spirits. Some are very wrathful. There are extremely famous stories about some of these. And then you get ones that are just hanging around. And I think those latter ones do fit more into that category of hungry dead, and that they will attach themselves to people, but they're not really out for hatred or to wreak havoc. Whereas you've got a whole nother classification which they hang on to their hatred so violently that they will take that out on every single person.
That's fascinating. So I know we touched last time about, very briefly, when we were talking about Judaism, I mentioned, in some of the Semitic supernatural beliefs, there seems to be a similarity, at least superficially, between Sheol and Yomi, so... And I think your contention was, if I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, was that that it's important not to imprint the concepts of another culture into another culture, and that they're very separate realities, Sheol and Yomi. But do you find any parallels between Japanese spirituality and what we find in the West? Because, and the reason I ask that is that I sometimes wonder if, and let me give you a little parenthetical statement to kind of give you the idea as to where I'm going with this. When I studied, when I was an undergraduate in studying psychology, we're studying abnormal psychology. One of the things we did, which was fascinating to everybody, was to look at different cultures and how certain mental illnesses that we don't even have in the DSM exist prolifically in these other places. And it's like they're illnesses, mental illnesses that only happen to the people of that particular culture. And Japan had a plethora of phobias that do not exist anywhere else in the world, to my knowledge.
Oh, absolutely.
And it was interesting. Like, one, it's kind of funny because it made the whole class laugh. It's the only one I remember, actually, unfortunately. But bear with me. I don't even remember the name of it, the Japanese name, but it was a phobia that certain men have, that the penis will retract into the body and not come back out. And it seems like it's a laughable kind of thing to us in the West, but they take it extremely serious. It's very traumatic phobia for them. And, so we were talking about how cultural can influence, and anthropology and different sociological situations can influence the mental health of a particular society, and even influence how they manifest. And it was interesting because we don't have any corollary to that in the West. But sometimes I think the same can be, because I'm a firm believer that psychology and spirituality are basically the same thing. It's just, we've just given it a materialist focus today. So, psychology strives to be very medical and very scientific. It wants to leave behind any of its more philosophical or esoteric origins, which it most certainly had when you look at how it evolved out of the thinking process of people like Freud and Jung, and how they, Jung in particular studied a lot of Asian philosophy and religion and applied, these things through archetypes and everything else to draw his psychological conclusions. So I really see psychology as the natural evolution of spirituality. We kind of talked about that a little bit on the beginning of the show, actually. But anyway, not to get sidetracked, I wonder if, just as we see in psychology, these spiritually speaking, could there be a similar thing to human experience that is being culturally interpreted that makes it seem different, which is where you get something that is similar in form, like Yomi and Sheol, and whether or not they're existent realities and actual, dare I say, places. I would rather see them as conditions, but most people would consider these things to be locations somewhere in some spiritual dimension. Could it be that our culture just influences our perception of how we see these realities that are so far beyond us that we really don't have the language to explain it? So we have to define them through our understanding of the world, which is going to come through our culture. Do you think that explains some of these similarities, or how would you see that? I know that's a loaded question, but I'm going to kind of just let you take it from here.
No. It's a good question. So there are, despite the vast differences, there are some similarities. And I would say that, using those similarities to gain familiarity with the unknown is a very good thing. I advocate for that, because anything that will allow you to wrap your head around something that you're trying to understand as a first model is great. But what I don't advocate for is going full Joseph Campbell and say, because there's a myth about this here and this here, then I have no proof, but there's a universal myth and it all has to be the same. I wouldn't advocate for that level of it. Mm-hmm. And in terms of Anokyo, which is that world over there, as opposed to our world, which is called Konokyo. Anokyo is separated by a river, a vast river, and this is even why during the time of Obon, which is the time for honoring the dead, Japanese say you should never ever go swimming, because the dead will take you away. You will never be seen again. Mm-hmm. And water plays an equally important part to the concept of chaos in Second Temple Judaism. It is the birthplace of monsters, and it is the natural state of the world. When God raised the firmament, he raised it from the water. He didn't dispel the water. The water was not destroyed. It was just displaced. And so that was kind of the apocalyptic view that people had, even in the Second Temple period, that, oh my gosh, all these bad things are happening. The world is going to come to an end. And whether that was because of the Babylonians or it was because of the Romans, it's always something or other. but they would say that, yes, the water is going to rise and the chaos is going to come right back and, take over the world. I wouldn't say there's such a belief. There's certainly no level of apocalyptic viewpoints that you find within Japanese, but I will say that you're absolutely right about some very specific conditions that the Japanese have. And one of the more famous ones is hikikomori. And that is the fear that if you go outside, you will be laughed at. You will be ridiculed. And so people will hold themselves up in their house or in their room and then live off their parents and not get a job. These are typically people that are neat. They're not in education, employed or training. So, and that's usually the source of the hikikomori condition. And there's some real fear there. I mean, there is an idea in Japanese that the nail that sticks out gets hammered down first. And there's such a level, because the other thing I would say is that for Japanese, the idea of rights, they are not individual based. I want to do this, therefore, I have a right to do it, and that should take a great deal of importance. Rather, it is the right of the community. You do as little as humanly possible to disrupt the community. And if you do, there are severe consequences to that. There's just a lot of different mind shifts in place.
Where do we draw the line, I guess this is a question for any culture, not just Japanese culture, but I think it is more poignant in Asian society because it's very, it's very matter of fact that superstition plays a very significant role in Chinese culture, and Chinese culture, as you indicated, was a major influence to Japanese culture, perhaps the only influence to Japanese culture until it, took on a life of its own, which is now quite separate. But you see it in gambling. The wearing red underwear, for example, to assure success, or even the kind of obsessive gambling that sometimes we see. In Asian society, it can far exceed anything that we would see in the West. So there's always gambling addiction here too, but it's more profound, and it's almost as if it takes on a type of spiritual component. So where do we draw the line in all religion between what is factually true spiritually and what is superstition or fictitious?
The two are pretty impossibly linked when it comes to Japanese culture.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to separate the two because there's 1,000 years of history, of tradition, and you don't go against that. In fact, you do everything humanly possible never to go against that. That it's really kind of hard to know. And I wish I had a better answer to that. But yeah, even after all of my studies, I can't even pretend to have like a phenomenal insight about that.
Well, it's such a big deal. It's such because I'm linking it to Chinese because it's the one I'm more familiar with, but I'm just thinking of a couple examples from Chinese culture just alone. And, the MGM Grand, for example, in Las Vegas, if you're old enough to remember, I know a lot of people listening to this might not be, but if you're around back then, the MGM Grand used to have a completely different opening. It was a giant lion, and what you would do is the MGM lion. It was a giant head, and you would walk in underneath its mouth. But because it looked like the doors were its mouth, Asian gamblers would not go there because this was considered to be a very bad omen, particularly if you're trying to go to a casino. You're looking for luck. You're not looking for bad omens. You don't want to lose money. So it was a profound enough problem that MGM spent millions of dollars, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars, redesigning the front almost immediately. It was only like that for a short time, and then they put the lion on a pedestal off to the side, and now the doors were normal. And
the head of market research was fired. I'm taking it.
I bet. Well, you think they would have done that research? Because let's face it, the lifeblood of Las Vegas money is really from Asia. It really is. A lot of their bottom line comes from the Asian gambler, and it's a very superstitious gambler. Another example is like the baccarat tables. You'll never see, baccarat seats are always numbered. You'll never see a fourth place, because four looks like the Arabic four looks like the Chinese character for death. And so, again, that's not the kind of energy you want to connect with archetypally when you're trying to harness your luck and win at the baccarat table. So those are Chinese examples, but I'd imagine it is a similar kind of thought process, and that's where I was getting at with where is there truth to the superstition, or is there superstition to the truth, I guess?
I would say that's more superstition to the truth for some of these more innocuous things. Like, for example, you actually get the exact same thing in Japanese, where for, which is she, one of the pronunciations is she, is short for death, which is shin. Same thing for nine. Nine is Q, and that also is kind of short for murder. And so that's why you never, ever, ever give a clock as a present, because it has both 4 and 9 in it.
Oh, wow.
Just don't do it. Now, feng shui is much more important to Chinese, traditions, and I'm sure that factored into the lion's mouth kind of thing.
Yeah.
But placement is also important, and for like Shinto temples, it's Buddhist temples. You never walk down the exact middle of the tori gates that appear, and that usually are there for at the entrance ways to temples, because that is the path of the gods. And if you do that, then bad things happen. If you happen to shove your chopsticks in the middle of rice,
yes, that's one you see a lot in the West, and you can see the reactions if you pay attention.
It's horrifying. Because that is a Buddhist funeral practice in Japan.
Yeah.
You do not do that ever. I mean, just kind of a humorous story. It was my wife's birthday, and I ran out to the convenience store in Japan to grab something, not to be the main gift, but just kind of kick off the day in the right way. And I got a few magazines, and I got some candles, and I brought it back, and I lit one of the candles, and I came in singing to her, and the look of horror on her face. And I'm like, what did I do wrong? And she's like, that's a funerary candle.
Oh, no.
And I just kind of hung my head, and I said, I am so sorry.
she said, I'm not going to risk eating the cake now.
Oh, yeah. No, just went
laced with arsenic
immediately.
Oh, no. We're going to take our next break here. We're talking with J.J. Johnson about Japanese spirituality and the fascinating aspects of some of their beliefs. More to come, and also taking your questions when we get back. Don't go away.
You're touching me already, and it's working up my nerves. You should probably forget me, 'cause I'm terrified you'll get me when I'm at my worst. It's not too late to let you know that you're in love with a ghost. So run! Pack up your bags and run. Once you see the truth, you'll be over it. Run. And when it's all said and done, run. You just gotta run. I could whisper sweeter things, and back to me you'd crawl. Puppeteer your love My ego's still providing. I'm not the one who's driving, but I can't find the brakes. Yeah, girl, there's no denying that even though I'm trying, I'm your next mistake. I'm falling in deep. You should take me at my word. It's not too late to let you know that you're in love with a ghost. Run! Pack up your bags and run. Once you see the truth, you'll be over it. Run! And when it's all said and done, run! You know you gotta, you know you gotta, you know you gotta run! Run! You know you gotta run! You just gotta run. You just gotta run.
Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final hour of Vestiges After Dark. We have been having a fantastic and so interesting conversation, I would say, with our guest, JJ Johnson, about Japanese spirituality. Now it's time for your questions. If you have any, you can ask them in the chat, or you could even call into the show if you'd like. That's 718-362-6380. That's 718-362-6380. Remember to enter PIN number 855-4111 to be placed into the queue. That's very important. You won't get in unless you dial in that PIN number. And then also international, you can call free on Skype by dialing Eye of the Seer. More to come. Don't go away. Okay, so we have, I don't know how many questions have been coming in, Brandon, on the chat room. Do we have any that you see? You there, Brandon? I'm not sure Brandon can hear us. Father Chris, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can't. Brandon, do you hear me, or are you having a microphone issue?
I'll message him.
Okay, looks like he's having some issue. And JJ, you can still hear me, right?
Yeah, I sure can.
Okay, so it's something going on with Brandon over there. Let me go ahead and mute him, and go ahead and unmute yourself again. Let's see if that works. I'm not sure what's going on with Brandon. Okay, Father Chris, have you seen any questions in the chat?
I know that Brandon grabbed a few, but
okay. So we need to get him back here.
I'll have to go back. Yeah, I'll have to go back. Here we go. What is the Japanese version of the afterlife? Right. Heaven. Here we go. Go back.
Okay. But go ahead and finish that one. Yeah, go ahead and ask it.
What's the Japanese version of the afterlife? Heaven. That process of passing over. Are there stages? Where do we go? So what's the Japanese eschatology or heaven like? You said there's no apocalyptic visions, but is there an idea of the afterlife amongst Japanese culture?
There is. However, I will say that so there are two primary religions that you will find in Japan, and that would be Buddhism and Shintoism, and they coexist extremely well. In fact, I think that some Japanese would even have difficulty pointing out which ones belong to which. But by and far, the main events that surround life and death are typically Buddhist in nature, and other items are more Shinto. And you don't really find too much of an idea of a defined afterlife, and that way it does kind of relate more to Sheol, in which you die and then you're sent over, and that's kind of about it. However, there is this idea of when you pass over. So usually it's on day 49. Like after you die, 49 days later, that is when you are brought back into the afterlife. And until then, you can be a wandering spirit that is partaking of some memories, everyday occurrences, etc. So it's radically different than what we find here. You know, you die, you go to heaven. And there it's much more of you're either a wandering spirit, or you're put into hold mode, and then on day 49, then you are brought back, and that's when you begin to participate into the wheel of life.
Is there a general fear of death more so in Japanese culture than in others, or are they rather matter of fact about it?
I think that there is a fear of it, but one thing that is rather unique is, and I think this is more inspired by Buddhist thought, is the moment that you die. You want to be in a calm, peaceful state of mind. You want to be able to meditate your way out of life. And if that end is violent, if you have worries that are on your mind, that can directly impact your station in the wheel of life, or even just completely screw up your afterlife if you don't happen to believe in reincarnation.
Is there
how much is this influenced post Second World War? I mean,
oh, that's an interesting question.
Elephant in the room. I mean, you know, when you had essentially emperor worship in Japan, and you know, we saw the sort of, you know, certain aspects of that in terms of kamikaze pilots, in terms of, you know, expecting to disembowel yourself rather than be dishonored or captured. You know, they don't speak of a fear of death. I mean, how do you think there's a switch in Japan, either side of that?
So it's a good question, and that's because there is such a radical transformation after World War II. You know, now rather than to an individual or to a clan, you find that the Japanese are very attached to the idea of community at large. They are apolitical. They are non-patriotic to a fault. In fact, the only kind of patriotic people that you will find are usually what you would equate to in the U.S. as ultra hardline white ringers, and these are old men that have these giant white trucks with horrible slogans posted all over them that are usually condemning Korean immigrants in the nation. But yeah, people stay completely away from all that. In fact, you can't even have political ads on TV or on radio. If you're looking to get voted into office, you have to put up little flyers or posters around the wards that you're trying to get elected in, just to get word out about your candidacy. Or you give stump speeches everywhere. Those are kind of the two things that are going on. But yeah, this idea of community has kind of risen to the utmost degree, because yeah, there was these ideas of ritualistic suicide if you dishonored yourself, if you did not follow the rules. And you still find that idea of ritualistic suicide very prevalent in Japan. If you are a parent and your child does something horrible, like murders somebody, to make amends to it, a lot of Japanese parents, rather than living with that shame, they will just kill themselves. And it's a very accepted way out.
Would you say that there is a divisiveness between Shinto and Buddhism, or do you find that most people sort of practice some amalgamation of both in some capacity, or do you find that the Shinto worldview and the Buddhist worldview are largely in agreement with each other, in the sense that, one, I think you kind of alluded to how one deals with one aspect of like the life and death stuff, and then Shinto deals with everything else. Do you find that like they kind of just practice both?
They do. They very much practice both. It's kind of like back in, ancient China, they said that you would be Confucius during business and then Taoist at night. Kind of the exact same thing.
Makes sense.
During major life events, you do Buddhist rites. When it's doing anything else, you go to Shinto shrines and you do it. So, yeah, it's kind of weird because they are vastly different religions.
Yeah.
Shintoism has a huge canon of gods and goddesses all over the place, and Buddhism does not. I mean, there is, unless you're dealing with Pure Land Buddhism, there is no deity. It's just life.
Well, particularly for like Zen, because I think Zen, it started in China, but I think it really sort of found its roots in Japan. I mean, really grounded itself in Japan. And Zen Buddhism is perhaps the most extreme of, the insignificance of even thinking about things like deities and it's all irrelevant.
Yeah, there are two major branches of Buddhism in Japan. There's Nichiren Buddhism and then Zen Buddhism. And yeah, you get some really extreme versions of Buddhism there. This is the land where monks who had reached a certain level of nirvana would actually like refrain from eating. They would eat tree bark and certain nuts, and then they would begin the process of self-mummifying themselves. And it's been over 100 years, and their corpses are still on display, and they look remarkably well preserved. And to go through that process for 5 agonizing years, and they just did it like a champ. I couldn't even begin to imagine.
It's so outside of our paradigm, in the West, and there really are no corollaries between the two. It's its own thing. It really truly is, and the inspiration behind it is also quite fascinating. Because reincarnation, as a foundational belief system to Buddhism and Hindu. We don't really have that in the West. I know that there's been some esotericists that have, well, not really esotericists, I should say, they're theosophists that have tried to argue that there was like a secret teaching at Alexandria that, came into Christianity and then the church suppressed it. I reject all of that.
Amen to that.
I don't think there's any evidence for that. I think that was definitely, I mean, they might have known about it because I'm sure there were Asian philosophers in Alexandria. So I don't think they would have been, I don't think scholars of the ancient world would have been completely shocked to hear stuff like that because they would have probably interacted with others that had this knowledge. But as a belief system, as like some kind of suppressed belief system, I mean, really the first time you can see any teaching about reincarnation, in my opinion, I mean, you might know of other sources, but the first time I see any teaching of reincarnation in the West is in medieval Kabbalah. And then it's only one division of Kabbalah that actually talks about the reinvigoration of souls. But I mean, it's a medieval thing and clearly must have been influenced by Eastern thought by that point. But
it could also just as easily have been shaped by what we just described as, because it seems to me that Japanese culture and religion is utterly transformed by World War II. And so we have it's kind of a good way of being able to imagine the sort of transformations that have happened throughout the history of, like you just mentioned Alexandria. Well, the Library of Alexandria was destroyed. There's a kind of a moment where there's a shift in thinking. And I think those shifts are not just they're not just political. I mean, I think that's a cop out. I mean, going back to what you said, JJ, about what you were saying was basically jingoism is not a thing in Japan. They don't wave flags and have all this national pride. Well, that seems to me to be a cultural response to the events of World War II. And then you've also got this same with Britain after the fall of the empire. Britain's nowhere near. It's not jingoistic at all. It's not unusual never to see a Union flag when you go to Britain, right? The other aspects of that about a community focus. Well, that's only possible in Japan because they have almost no immigration, or immigration is so highly controlled. They don't let Muslims into Japan. No, you can't become a Japanese citizen, right? It's so. I don't know. The World War II is obviously this pivot point in forced opening up to the world, alongside a sort of sense of shame, I think, and that has a religious or cultural religion, impossible to separate, a cultural religious effect. Which is similar to what Bishop Brian you're describing about the melting pot of Alexandria in that era.
Well, yeah, because I've always found reincarnation to be a fascinating shift in. If we're going to talk like Campbell and try to get to this idea that there's this universal archetype that everyone's tapped into. I think one of the arguments that would be against that and in favor of kind of how JJ is presenting this data would be reincarnation, because it's such a difference. It's such a deviation from anything we have in the West. The one life that you live is ethically as perfectly as you can, as morally as perfectly as you can. And then you could be rewarded for it. Initially Judaism, you were rewarded in life. Then eventually they developed more of a traditional afterlife notion as time went on. But by the time you get to Christianity, and then eventually by the time you get to Islam, 500 years later or so, there's a well-established paradise or perfection that we return to, where there is happiness and there's joy, and then there's no returning here. There's no risk of returning here, where Buddhism has nirvana, parinirvana, but it's not really heaven. It's kind of almost as if heaven is an illusion. And I really wanted to talk to you about that, which is why I brought up reincarnation, JJ, because this season on Vestiges has been sort of a theme about the afterlife and what happens to us after we die. And one of the things that Buddhism in the Tibetan school, so the Vajrayana, most Buddhism in Japan is Mahayana, I would think, right? Or an expression of Mahayana. Whereas in Tibet, they have their own thing, which is kind of a combination of the shamanic religion, the Bon religion, I think it's called, and then Buddhism as it influenced, and they kind of retained both and kind of combined them into what is now the Vajrayana school. But one of the things that they talk about in that are the six gati, and we've been discussing the six gati throughout this season, the human realm being the center point and the most precious, because here we can experience the bliss and joy of happiness, and we can also experience the pain and suffering, the pain of suffering, and then then there's like two heaven realms above that. You've got demigod and then the heaven realms where you're too blissed out to even care about enlightenment or awareness or just even spiritual development, because you're just so satiated that you just sort of exist in this apathetic state of happiness. And then there's the animal realm, which is close to the human, but they're suffering there because they are not masters of their own destiny. We eat them. They suffer because they're beasts of burden, that kind of thing. And then hungry ghosts, and then hell. Okay, so hell realms. And the Vajrayana would say that you don't have to die to experience these. We might experience all of these gati in different forms throughout our own lives, but death is where we could get stuck in one of them, and we always want to return to the human realm if we do not attain to enlightenment, because here's our only opportunity to attain to enlightenment, because here we have the balance, the middle way. But what I've noticed and what I find interesting in the early part of this season, JJ, we had some guests on that talked about near-death experiences and how they describe these fantastical realms, where it's everything you would expect from, I guess, a Western interpretation of heaven, to the point that it actually sounds a whole lot like the heaven gati that Buddhism is trying to help you avoid. Because if you get stuck there, you could be stuck there for eons and eons and eons of time, making no spiritual progress, just basically vegetating to happiness and bliss. And I sometimes wonder if what they're experiencing is actually the bardo. In fact, I don't wonder about it. I'm pretty sure it is. That the near-death experience is exactly the after-death trials that of the bardo that the Bardo Thodol I guess elucidates in Tibetan Buddhism, and basically teaches us how to avoid the dangers of that realm, because that's where fear can overcome you. And you were talking about how important it is in Buddhism to die well, to meditate, and to be able to die in a state of mind that allows one to have, I guess, some kind of awareness of the whole process, so that we can sort of effectuate some direction with it. And this is why I think, because in the bardo, we're at risk for falling into any kind of attachment if we're only focused on what, this joy of heaven. Then it's almost as if the universe manufactures the joy of heaven. And yeah, Jesus comes and welcomes you with open arms, but it's all an illusion. It's just you're replacing the illusion of life, the Maya of life, with another form where life and death really don't matter as much as it is whether or not you're awake or whether or not you're still sleeping. The death and life process is just, the ebb and flow of existence, but really it's whether you're awake or not that matters. Whereas here in the West, we're only focused on life and death to the degree that, most people today in the West seem to think that you automatically go to heaven. You don't really need to do much. Jesus paid the price for your sins. You're all set. Doesn't matter what you do. As long as you believe in him, you're gold. It's a big contrast between the two. But do you think, JJ, that there is some reality to the Buddhist bardo, some risk to the afterlife process that maybe Western religion is not preparing us for?
I have no idea. I would say it very well could be the idea that you need to be serene in death is something that is so alien in the West.
Terribly
we
so.
Have no idea about that, and because of our healthcare system, whatever the cause may be, death is usually not a pretty sight here at all. And Japan is a culture that takes, the vast majority of the country is elderly now, and there is a severe risk of depopulation within that country for an entire variety of psychological and cultural reasons. But the country takes extremely good care of its elderly. I've seen that in my own in-laws experience there and so many others. And the fact that you are afforded as much dignity in those later years really kind of help. I think a lot of that is directly informed by this idea of you should be able to have a serene death in order to take that with you into the afterlife.
You know,
and going back to a previous point real quick, Buddhism, when it was first kind of spreading out of India, was soundly rejected almost on every quarter. Like you had Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. He left China and they just said that he went south, right? Well, then Buddhism, a couple of centuries later, began to flow in from the south. And the Chinese thought that, oh my gosh, Lao Tzu went to India, they corrupted his teachings into this Buddhism thing, and they began to slaughter every Hindu that they found they can get their hands on that believed in Buddhism. Yeah. Same thing for the Middle East. In fact, in Ethiopia, which the language was really developed along the Silk Road, you have a word called Buddha, which is the evil eye. And it's a very racist idea that Buddhists could look at you and give the evil eye to anyone. And yeah, it's weird, these little connections that you find.
Well, in reality, I guess, Buddhism is Hindu heresy, and heretics never bode well in the beginning. Yep. We see that all the time. In a way, Christianity was Jewish heresy, and that didn't bode well for at least the first 300 years. Yeah. So I guess the reason I asked this is that I have in my own work. Okay, so when I work with clients that are suffering from either haunting, spiritual attachment, even something that they suspect might be demonic in nature or very malevolent, at least in the Christian worldview sense, what we do find is very different than what theology teaches about any of these things. The theological stories kind of give a framework and a language to them, but they're not really terribly accurate in terms of what's actually going on and how to resolve them, we find. And one of the things that I have noticed in the West, at least, because this is where I work, is increasing numbers of radical hauntings that are associated with the time around a significant family member dying. And this is something that I have attributed to just what you're saying, that people are not dying in serenity. They're dying in pure terror and fear. The healthcare system sort of supports that. The last place I would want to be when I'm dying is in a hospital room. I would rather, I'd rather go out to the woods and just like perish on the base of a tree than be put, with ventilators and, I have a very clear, explicitly stated living will, and my family now can reference this video if they need it. I do not want any resuscitation under any circumstances for that very reason, that I want, when that time comes for me, and it will come, I want to be fully in the moment. I want to have firm grasp of the entire thing. As another saying that Buddhists have in Tibet is die with your eyes open. In fact, in some circles in Tibetan Buddhism, it's taught that the one of the worst ways you can die is in your sleep. because you have no control. You have no way to prepare for it. It catches you like a thief in the night, and anything can possibly happen. Because in this worldview, there's a lot of risk to that moment between life and death. And it's like a lot of the underworld challenges. And that is, I guess, an archetype because it exists in all things. I mean, even Jesus' descent to hell for 3 days is a sort of an archetypal expression of that same sort of hero's journey in the underworld, and something that needs to be conquered. In Buddhism, what needs to be conquered is the self, so one would want to arrive at some sense of deeper awareness, and then that leads to better outcomes. It's kind of a strange way they go about it there. I declare my ignorance of Buddhism other than very superficial, but it seems to me that the journey to conquer the idea of the self is an inward journey. Like it does seem conflicted. I think, don't get me wrong, I know that the tactics that are employed are very similar to what we would do, serving other people, but it does seem to me that it seems a poor strategy. Well, I mean, from a Western vantage point, I can see where it would look like that. But I mean, again, the self is different to Buddhists. I mean, even the word soul, like one of the tenets of Buddhism, which exists in all of them, Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, all three primary schools of Buddhism, have this same tenet, which is anatta. It means literally no soul. But, Westerners hear that and they start freaking out because, the soul is such an important concept to us here, but Buddhism sort of dismisses it as an illusion. But they don't see it exactly the same way that we do, in the sense that their idea of the soul is the nature of the ego, the self itself, that what gives it what gives yourself identity. And they see that as the illusion that needs to be conquered, because what the self does is it keeps you locked into a vicious cycle of attachment to impermanence, and that impermanence leads to sorrow, and that sorrow leads you into more attachment, into reaching and grasping for things that can never endure, that have no intrinsic value, that they're all just basically, they're like, they're illusions. They're clouds that just dissipate upon reaching them. And that's what's being conquered here. And it's not as though there's no reality that exists. There is, shunyata is sort of another big tenet of the three schools of Buddhism, and foundational here. And I would think that, even in Japanese culture, it sort of influences how they respond to things like the afterlife. But shunyata itself is also, yes, it means emptiness, but it's not emptiness in the sense of nothingness. It's emptiness in the sense of the removal of all illusion, all attachment, and then we arrive at the truth. And in my opinion, that sounds very Christian, in the sense of what is the kingdom.
The Christian concept would be kenosis.
Yes.
Yes. Self-emptying.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
So that does make some more sense.
Yeah.
It's just that I think. Yeah, and again, it's because I'm ignorant. Perhaps I should learn some more about Buddhism.
You got to learn. Yeah, definitely.
Because I understand that the Christian approach to that isn't to sit on a rock and try and self-empty.
Yeah, right.
Nor is it about relieving your bladder. But we would really eschew the idea of wanting to create an absence or a whole. The idea, the word comes from Philippians 2, right? That Christ didn't consider himself didn't exploit his equality with God, but rather emptied himself. Mm-hmm. And it was in that basically on the cross. So in self-emptying, that's how he then is super elevated. And so it's not about creating a void. The kenosis of Jesus was the action of going on the cross. Yes. And so I don't know what the Buddhist equivalent is. I'm sure there is one. I don't know. I know the Christian image of that is, in fact, to take up your cross. Right. That's the kenotic act. Is to empty oneself by taking on the burdens of life and dragging your cross up the hill. So what's the Buddhist?
Well, I mean,
equivalent?
it isn't as I wouldn't say. I mean, JJ might have more to contribute here, but I would say that Buddhism doesn't make the focus about embracing suffering to conquer suffering. It's more about being aware of where your suffering comes to, and by making those leaps and bounds in awareness, we can then unwrite the thought processes that lead us into forming these attachments that produce unhappiness, and then thus you break the cycle of rebirth. You eliminate samsara, and then you awaken to the reality of nirvana, which is really, in Buddhism, as I've said so many times on the show before, it's not like heaven and hell. In the West, you have very distinctive places. They're seen as locations in some dimension somewhere, where heaven is this perfect paradise and hell is this place of eternal suffering. And they're very distinctive. They're very different realities, and you end up in one or the other. Whereas where the division in Buddhism is not that kind of polarity. You have samsara and nirvana, and the only difference between the two is that those in nirvana are aware that they're there, and those in samsara are not aware that they're there. Everyone is actually in nirvana. It's just whether or not you're aware of it. And until you become aware of it, you suffer.
It might explain why there's no Buddhist Red Cross,
I don't know. JJ, what are your thoughts? I'm sure you can contribute a great deal more to it than I can.
Oh, I don't know about that. But I would say that even in the beginning of Second Temple Judaism, when Judaism was infected by this advanced dualism of Zoroastrianism, and it was trying to identify who the enemy of God is, and more about this idea of a more defined afterlife. You'll find in some pseudepigraphal books that hell is literally right next to heaven, and it's only defined and separated by a very fine line, and you have to be able to walk that in order to be able to navigate. So I mean, even in early parts when in Jewish and very early Christian thought, when this stuff wasn't really solidified, that people were trying to imagine what it could be like. But in Buddhism, this idea that I would say that one of the major defining factors was determining how you can get rid of this idea of self and embrace, parinirvana. And you get like famous examples of the Sermon on Vulture Mount, where the Buddha held forth a lotus flower, and only that one simple action influenced one of his most devout followers to just instantly snap into that state. He understood. And then you go to China, where Buddhism became a major radical force. And then you had a split between the northern and southern schools, where the northern school insisted that no, those such things could never happen. It takes absolute diligent day-by-day grinding work to absolve yourself of self, whereas the southern school was like, no, you can do whatever you want. It can just come to you in a flash. And it was that school that actually permeated over into Japan, and that's where you get the idea of riddles. What is the sound of one hand clapping? It's very stereotypical, but these are things that are meant to inspire that sudden flash of being able to completely abandon the self.
Fascinating stuff. I would probably be very selfish, but I could talk to you for hours on end, JJ, but I want to give more time to our audience. So
absolutely.
Brandon, do we have other questions?
We do. Real quick. Let's see here. I have a question for you, JJ. Going back to the Yurei and Yokai, are there any stories of Yurei possessing dolls and living within them as like a vessel?
Oh, I am so glad you asked me that. Oh, yes. In fact, so ningyo, or dolls, they are seen as a kind of perfect vessel for possession because they are made in the image of the human body.
So it's an effigy. It's like a literal effigy that can take on those characteristics.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And there's even such a phenomenal wealth of folklore, superstition, and knowledge that is built around the idea of curses. And there's not just one type of curse. Regular O curses are noroi. However, you have this other version, which is tanari, which is a corruption of the older Japanese word tachiari. And this one actually does smack back to kind of Jewish thought because it is a corruption of the divine touching the mortal. And this is a severe Shinto concept. But, you know, in Judaism, if you're a prophet and you encounter God, that is not a good day for you. I mean, it's going to be the worst day of your entire life because you can be burned to a crisp. Yeah. And in Japanese thought, if a dark manifestation touches you of the divine, then you can be completely corrupted. So anyway, a lot of this is to say that in Japanese culture, you have not only dolls that can be possessed by wandering spirits or much darker forces, you even have a version of voodooism in which people will craft these straw humanoid shapes, and then they will nail horrible thick nails into them, usually into trees, to torture the people in which they are meant to be the stand-ins for. In fact, the last thing I'll say is that there are specialized shrines which deal with the disposal of these accursed dolls.
It's so fascinating. And I think that gives us, you know, we definitely have a correlation to that. You know, when you think of how many times do we get cases with the claim of a possessed doll or stuffed animal or something like that. I have my own theories and contentions about it, which might not be as fascinating as all the the using an effigy or being a perfect vessel, but I think that we do in fact create. I think as a vehicle of creation, I think that's part of our nature. I think to create is our primary nature. I think we are very skilled at creating incorporeal thought forms, or as Buddhists would call them, tulpas, and because we're skilled at doing it by nature, but we're not skilled at controlling it because we're never taught that these things even exist, let alone how to manifest one and utilize it in some kind of proactive way. That a child's love, for example, could be imprinted into a favorite toy, a doll, or a animal or something that they have. It's an effigy of something that's meaningful. Along the same lines as the invisible friend phenomenon that a lot of children experience. As a child that had that, I can say without any question that my imaginary friends were not imaginary. They were not invisible, not to me anyway. And they manifested in very real ways and could actually affect the external environment. Do I think that those were entities or demons or spirits or anything? No. Well, I mean, spirits perhaps, but not spirits in the generic ghostly sense. I would actually definitively say that these were thought forms. These were tulpas that I created, not to the degree of an egregore because nobody else could see the effects of these things, but they were definitely real and powerful to me. And I think a lot of children experience this, and when it's focused, when that phenomenon is focused on a doll or a plushie, I think it can actually animate that particular effigy to come alive in that capacity to the degree that the thought form has sophistication. So very unsophisticated ones probably can't do much, but more sophisticated ones could perhaps do quite a bit. I don't know about Annabelle, I think that's actually a fake story. I don't think that's real. Everything I've researched on Annabelle does not seem to indicate that there's any actual truth to it. It seems like it was made up. But we've encountered, I've actually exercised dolls that had amazing stories, interesting things. I exercise them. I send them to the Haunted Museum for Zach to deal with. The reality of it is that I think that's what's really being possessed. I don't think it's actually an independent spirit or a wrathful, spirit or human being that is attached to a doll. I really think it is a thought form that gets implanted. And then when that child grows up and no longer is investing love into the effigy, because it's responding in the capacity of a thought form, responds as a real entity would, that it feels abandoned and it feels lost or sad. And that sad can turn very quickly to anger, which is why a lot of these dolls almost inevitably, I mean, I'm sure you've probably seen it if you're doing paranormal investigation out there. I'm sure you've encountered this. Okay. One thing that's almost always characteristic, it's never usually a doll that you went and bought off the shelf and then brought home to your child and all of a sudden it starts acting up. It's almost always a doll that was left over after the child grew up. Almost every single time, with rare exception. Occasionally you might see something that breaks out of that paradigm. It's always going to be outliers, but the mainstream manifestation of this phenomenon is almost always that. It's an old doll. It's something that is no longer being loved and cared for like it used to, and the thought form was imprinted into it, and it can't leave because its whole identity is the object itself, and then it reacts violently to that sadness. And if it was a very sophisticated thought form, it can produce very negative effects for the family that possesses that particular doll or has it in their environment. So that's my theory on it. It's a little more than a theory, in my opinion, because we've been able to effectively communicate with these things and effectively resolve them through this model. So it works for me. Nothing's 100% though. There's always going to be too much mystery out there to really know what's going on here. But that's what I've seen in most of these demonic cases of dolls and inanimate objects that sort of come alive. What do you think of that, JJ? Do you think that's plausible, that's what's going on? Or
I think that is any theory that seems to have extremely practical applications, I think is about as good as you can get. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you have been able to prove that time and time again. And I see nothing that smacks to be incorrect about that whatsoever. I've seen that in a few of the different things that I have, been witness to over the years. And I will say that one last thing, if you're wanting to watch a really good anime about the paranormal and dolls and some other things, there's one that's out this season and it's going into its second part of its elongated season called Dark Gathering, which is Dark Gathering, and it's all about this little girl who goes out and traps these horrific spirits, Japanese spirits, into stuffed animals and keeps them around, and they're hunting for a bigger thing that took her mother. It starts off really kind of silly, and now it's at the point where it's getting past those roots and it's just trying to shock its audience with every new episode. It's awesome.
You have given me a lot to watch, and I can't wait because I just love Japanese storytelling. I think it's brilliant, and particularly the scary stuff. It's just so good. And you are right. Then when it gets translated to American production, it loses a lot of the essence. When you watch the original stuff, it's so much better. It's so better. They really get the feeling of it, and The Grudge is a good example there. JJ, in the last couple minutes, if you could tell the audience how they could find out more about you or anything that you'd like them to know about your podcast, anything, just go ahead and let them know.
I greatly appreciate that. Yeah, you can find me over on Southern Demonology, which is my primary podcast. However, we have started up a new one, and it's between myself Victor, who is the host of Trailer Trash Terrors, and then David Griffith, who is a well-respected paranormal researcher, and now Father Mike, who is another exorcist who lives in Georgia. But anyway, us four have kind of united, and we have a list of 1,600 different topics in which we run through. We pick 5 at a time, and we just go to town on them. And it's rapid fire sessions. It's a lot of fun, more lighthearted, but we can get into some pretty deep conversations. But that's the paranormal rundown. But you can find Southern Demonology at southerndemonology.com. We're available on all podcasting platforms. And yeah, we have a Discord server, pretty active community, a lot of friendly folks. It's kind of the nice corner of the internet, as I like to call it. Brandon's on there. So yeah, it's a good time. And we're now in season 4. And yeah, we cover everything from Japanese items to Second Temple Judaism to spiritual defense and warfare, along with a host of other items. So
that sounds fantastic. Make sure you all check that out. I mean, it sounds like a great time. It really does. JJ, I just want to thank you so much and thank Brandon for introducing this show to you, because you are just such a fantastic, wonderful guest, so knowledgeable, and a great conversation every time. We can't wait to have you back on. I know that Brandon has in the works for the next season in the winter to have you back on. So we greatly look forward to that.
Oh, I greatly appreciate the opportunity. And it's been fantastic getting to come on, meeting yourself, meeting Father Yates, of course, reacquainting with Brandon. Yeah, it's just been a fantastic time. I love every appearance. I just apologize if my first appearance happens to bring, bad tidings.
I think we got it worked out. We got the internet gods to finally cooperate, and I was able to exorcise the demons from my computer. Well, again, JJ, thank you so much. Father Chris and Brandon, thank you. And I thank all of you for joining us this season in the topics of very weighty, heavy topics. It's rough, right? I mean, there's a lot that we discuss on this show, and it's not always comfortable, and it's not always easy. And I know that my perspective and my demeanor is not always easy to deal with. Ask my family. I'm not easy to live with. So, it can't be a great time all the time. You know what I mean? But anyway, this is the last episode of the season. Okay. So I want to say happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, because we won't see on this show until the middle of February. That's when the next season kicks back in. We have 17 episodes, I believe, on the books. So make sure you watch for that. The best way to keep in touch with us is to subscribe to the YouTube channel and also on Spreaker. Make sure you like all of our videos when you watch them. Put out a review on the podcast platforms about the show if you like it. That helps too. But then again, if you want to communicate with us on a deeper level, come to the Nicolean Network, and that's where we have all of this discussion off the air, and you can ask me any question you want, and I try to always give a very prompt and complete response. But that's it. Until then, I will see you all out there in the ether. God bless everyone.